Hi, my name is David Warner Matheson, and tonight we're continuing the series of Seeing the Star Myths, Envisioning the Constellations. This is the fifth in the series, and we're going to be continuing with two extremely important zodiac constellations. So if you have not seen the previous videos, I'd recommend going back to take a look at those, and I'm going to put the links to all of the previous videos up here so that you can go back. And I would start with the first one. If you have not seen the very first one, I'll put that up here and or here, and then I'll put the others. The first one explains why it's so important to be able to envision the constellations, how to imagine the constellations, the outlines of the constellations, and why that's so important for seeing the connection to the ancient myths. So tonight we're going to be continuing, and we're going to be looking at some constellations that are actually up at this time of year. We're going to be looking at the extremely important constellations of Capricorn and Aquarius. And Capricorn and Aquarius are very visible here in the month of September. And so let's go inside the Planetarium app. I use the Stellarium or Stellarium Planetarium app, and we'll go inside and take a look at the night sky to see the outlines of Capricorn and Aquarius. So here we are inside of Stellarium, and you can see this is the first part of September of 2018, and we still have this glorious lineup of planets that we've spoken about in previous videos. And Jupiter is now far to the west, and Scorpio, which we've spoken about in previous videos, let me bring in the outlines, is starting to dive down into the west. But you can still see the full length of the constellation Scorpio, really glorious as it inclines downwards towards the west. We're facing to the south from the point of view of an observer in the northern hemisphere, so west is to the right when we're facing south, and east is to the left. And so Scorpio is inclining downwards towards the west, preceded by Jupiter, the bright yellow planet Jupiter. Saturn is positioned above the teapot in the constellation of Sagittarius, which we've spoken about in a previous video. Saturn is much smaller to the naked eye than Jupiter, but very visible above the teapot formation that we spoke about. And then the planet Mars, which right now is as large and bright as I ever remember seeing Mars. It's actually larger and brighter than I've ever remembered seeing this planet. And so Mars will actually help us to find Capricorn and Aquarius that we're going to be focusing on tonight. We'll also talk about the southern fish. But you can use Mars if you're watching this in 2018 to help you find Capricorn. But if you're watching this in a different year, when the planets have moved to a different place on their respective orbits, then they move through all the different constellations of the zodiac, so they won't always be there. You can't always use Mars. So we'll talk about how to find Capricorn and Aquarius when Mars isn't there, but right now it's very convenient. But as I was saying, the constellations have continued to move towards the west. It's a consequence of us moving along on our orbit. As Earth orbits the Sun, the stars along the ecliptic path here, where we're finding the zodiac constellations, are rising approximately 4 minutes earlier each night. Each night as we move around the Sun, the constellations along this band here are rising 4 minutes earlier. That means they're going to be 4 minutes further ahead each night than they were the night before as they move towards the west. So that's bringing into view for us here in September the portion of the Milky Way that contains Capricorn and Aquarius and some other important constellations, very mythologically important constellations that are to the east of the brightest part of the Milky Way. So this part of the Milky Way that we've been talking about, we've spoken about Scorpio and Sagittarius, we've talked about Ophiuchus and Hercules. Here's Aquila, the eagle, and the other great bird of the Milky Way, Cygnus, the swan, with Deneb up there. This is very bright and distinctive constellations. Here's the brilliant little constellation of Delphinus the dolphin. All of these we've spoken about in previous videos. But as the Earth continues around its orbit, and as these constellations continue to move a little bit further to the west each night, then we get into this portion of the sky which is much darker and fewer bright stars. There are far fewer bright and distinctive stars in this region here. And H.A. Rey, in his essential and indispensable book, The Stars, A New Way to See Them, explains that this region of the sky is the wet region because it contains constellations like the Southern Fish. Capricorn is sometimes depicted as a sea goat, a sea goat with a fish tail. Aquarius, the water bearer. We'll talk later about Pisces, the fishes, and over here this is the tip of the whale, Cetus the whale. So these are all watery constellations, and this is kind of a desolate region of the sky with very few bright stars, with the exception of one in the Southern Fish that we'll talk about tonight. So this wet region, this dark region of the sky, there's really plenty of constellations to find in here, but it is mythologically important. I've spoken about this in some myths where, for instance, when the god Hermes is winging his way across the desolate ocean to reach Ogygia and bring the news to Odysseus that the gods have decided that he can finally try and make his way home, I believe this is the region of the sky that Hermes is winging his way across, and he says, oh, this region is so desolate, and I don't even like going over it because there's no human habitations to make offerings to the gods. It's just wasteland, ocean. So we're going to be looking in this wet region of the sky that H.A. Rey calls the wet region of the sky, the dark region of the sky. There's not as many bright stars in the constellations, but they're still very rewarding constellations to find, and they're very mythologically important. So let's look at the constellations of Capricorn, the goat, and Aquarius, the water bearer, right in here. There's his head and his water vessel, and down here the Southern Fish. So I'm going to zoom in on them in a moment, but what you have to remember is that they're to the west, they're to the east as Sagittarius and Scorpio make their way to the west. So this is the region that's to the east that's following behind this brightest part of the Milky Way. So in contrast, it's going to seem even more desolate, and that's why the myths, I think, talk about it that way. So let's zoom in on that region and see how do we find the constellations of Capricorn and Aquarius. So if you remember from the previous video where we talked about how to find Sagittarius, and the brightest part is the teapot, you might be able to see it right there. As we go beyond that, right next to Sagittarius, we're going to get to see Capricorn, the goat. And Capricorn is actually an enormous constellation. It really doesn't look that big on the star charts, and when I put it in my books and the diagrams, you would think that Capricorn might be a small constellation in the sky, but really Capricorn is quite a large constellation. And the brightest stars in Capricorn are this little bob tail of the goat. It's kind of a little upraised tail of the goat, just like a real goat runs around with the little tail, and then these horns up front, which these horns will be pointing right towards part of Aquarius, but we'll talk about Aquarius in a minute. So first you're going to probably be able to spot the little bob tail, these two little stars here, and the two horns, or the brightest two stars in the horns of the goat. Okay, so this is kind of the line of the back of Capricorn, and right now you have this wonderful visual aid. The planet Mars is right in between Sagittarius and Capricorn right now. So the bobtail of the goat is not too far above Mars. But remember, I'm telling you, this is a large constellation. It's really quite remarkable how big it is in the sky compared to how it just doesn't look that way in the star charts. A lot of constellations are like that. Scorpio, I've talked about that too. So now let's bring in the stars of Capricorn. So you see this little bobtail and the horns of the goat, which are pointing right towards Aquarius's forward leg. We'll get to that in a moment. So I like to find the little bobtail of the goat first, not far to the east of Sagittarius. And then I look for these two horns, or two stars in the horns of the goat. And then Capricorn has basically two triangular shapes. So this is one constellation where I actually don't prefer the outline of H.A. Rey. I love the outlines of H.A. Rey. They're absolutely essential, but for reasons that I'll talk to in a little bit, that I'll discuss in a little bit, I like to look at these two triangles of Capricorn, these two triangles. So let me go to, I'm going to show you how on Stellarium to go to a different way of outlining. You can use, instead of the H.A. Rey, you can use just the traditional Western outlines, and then you'll see these two triangles of Capricorn. This is how I envision Capricorn when I go out to look for Capricorn in the night sky. With apologies to H.A. Rey, there's a few constellations of his where I don't use his outlining system, and I'll show you some mythological reasons for that as well. But these two triangles are very distinctive and important, and actually this triangle, I don't like the way they've drawn it here on the on Stellarium's Western outlines. This triangle, I go down to this star and this star, so it's kind of like a triangle with two fingers here, and then a triangle with a deeper triangle here for its two legs, and then there's the bobtail. So let's take those lines out again and see if you can trace the horns of the goat, the forward pointing horns. Those are bright stars, and then these bright stars of the upward bobtail. Right now you've got Mars to help you get into the right vicinity. And then here's the twin triangles of the goat. Here's the head, and here's the feet. And it's, like I said, quite large in the sky. It takes up quite a bit of space. These horns kind of give you the forward boundary and the tail, and then the triangles are in between that. So that's really the way to find Capricorn. There's not many more landmarks I can point you to. You have to basically go from Sagittarius and find these little bobtail and the horns. But also, if you know how to find Aquarius, then that will also help you dial in to Capricorn. So let's move these constellations a little bit into better view right here. So Capricorn's horns are also pointing right towards the forward leg of Aquarius. Now here we see an example of why H.A. Rey's outlines are so essential. This is an absolutely useless outline for Aquarius, the traditional Western. There's also this Western outline, also useless. This will not help you find, neither of these outlines will help you envision or find Aquarius, and they won't help you understand the roles Aquarius plays in mythology. So let's go to H.A. Rey. We still see the horns of the goat, we still see the bobtail. I like this triangle for the head, and then I like the triangle for the feet coming down to here. So it's kind of like he's leaping or something. This triangle here. We'll talk about that later. So the horns of the goat are pointing right towards this forward leg of Aquarius. Let's move Aquarius just a little bit further along. There we go. So now I'm going to actually turn off the planets, because you can't see Neptune with your naked eye anyway. The Stellarium is telling us that there's Neptune passing through. The planets all pass through the zodiac constellations. The zodiac are the constellations that are aligned with the ecliptic path, but we are going to remove the planets now, and I'm just going to remove this whole thing right here, and now we'll talk about finding Aquarius. So let me turn the lines off. Capricorn is pointing to the forward leg of Aquarius, And then the brightest stars in Aquarius, the easiest to find, are actually right up here in the head. And it actually, this part of the head looks kind of like a zigzag in the night sky because this star up here is not as bright. But Aquarius has a diamond-shaped head with a single eye in the center of the head. This diamond-shaped head is very distinctive, and then from there you can kind of come down to this star right here and trace out the back of the running figure of Aquarius. So let's bring him back in. So the head, as I said, there's a single eye. This is pretty easy to find, and this forward leg is pretty easy to find. It connects up to this bright star along the back. That's actually basically the hip. So Capricorn points to the forward leg, then you can trace along the back, and you can also find this kind of distinctive diamond-shaped head with the one star here. And these stars look a little bit like a zigzag. So even as I zoom out, you can see this you'll be able to find in the sky. This will help you find Aquarius. It's actually not too far from the Great Square. The Great Square is rising right now too. But we'll talk about the Great Square of Pegasus another night. There's the Great Square. It's rising in the east. So if you're having trouble, you can find Aquarius in between this Great Square of Pegasus and Capricorn, whose horns are pointing to this forward leg. So the outline of Aquarius looks like a figure who's running, and that's very important in the myths. He's a headlong runner, he's described in some of the Greek epics. Figures who are associated with Aquarius are often swift runners. You can see it looks like he's running with this great pitcher of water of his. One leg is flying behind him, okay, and one leg is straight forward, and Capricorn is pointing towards that leg. And then this distinctive head will help you find the arm of Aquarius that holds this great water vessel of the constellation. And you can see all of this. All of this is very distinctive. I'm going to move it along so that doesn't keep popping out. This is very distinctive in the night sky, but the stars aren't very bright. But you can actually see the water that's pouring down from the pitcher. You won't see these long lines, there's nothing there, but these little splashes of water at the bottom from the vessel are visible. So I'm going to turn the stars off again and show you how to pick out the constellation of Aquarius. So here's that distinctive diamond-shaped head with the one star. The arm is going to be right here. So in the night sky, you come down from the end of the head, that's basically his shoulder, and then you come down here, and from here you're going to see this triangular shape at the top of the water vessel, and then it's got a very narrow base, so it's like an urn, a classical amphora, with this wide triangular top, narrow base, and then the streams pour down to these little splashes of water, these three stars, and you can see them in the sky. They're delightful, coming out of this pitcher held by Aquarius. So once again, diamond-shaped head, arm holding out this pitcher. Then continuing down from the head, you get to this hip bone, and that goes to this forward leg that the horns of the goat are pointing right towards. And then the rear leg is kicked up in the sky like this. Let me bring those back in so you can see them. Everyone see that? Diamond-shaped head. From that end of that head, the shoulder leads to this arm that's holding up this pitcher. It's got this distinctive shape. You can see this in the sky. The stars aren't bright, but they are distinct because there's not that many bright stars. So these stars do show up, and these little splashes do show up. It is a bit challenging, but it's quite satisfying when you find it. And you have some help. Right now you have help from Mars, which is located right over here. But you have some help from the goat that's pointing right towards this forward leg. And you have some help from this kind of zigzag formation of the... When I say zigzag, I'm talking about this star, the eye, this star, and this star. Those are the brightest stars of the head. This one you have to look a little bit harder, maybe squint a little bit. But that will help you find Aquarius. Now those streams of water are pouring down upon the southern fish. The name is Piscis austrinus. Piscis austrinus means fish of the south, and this very bright star right here is the famous Fomalhaut. Fomalhaut is the brightest star in this whole region, and it's pretty far to the south, meaning those of us in the northern hemisphere, it's going to be pretty close to the horizon, but it's very distinctive and you can see it. The water is pouring out towards Fomalhaut. The rest of the stars of the southern fish are very dim, and because it's close to the horizon, the southern horizon, for those of us in the northern hemisphere, there's a lot of light pollution that'll probably drown those out. You'll probably only be able to see this bright star of Fomalhaut. The name in Arabic means mouth of the fish, and you can see why. It's called mouth of the fish because it's in the front of the southern fish. So Fomalhaut is a very important constellation. There's a lot of astronomy pictures from the Hubble telescope that you can look and learn some amazing things about the star itself that they've been able to see with the high-powered telescopes that are orbiting or out in space. But with the naked eye, you can also see this amazing bright star, Fomalhaut, and it's associated with Aquarius, but it's actually in the southern fish. Aquarius is traditionally pouring the water down upon the southern fish. So that is how to find Fomalhaut. I always look for Aquarius first, and then you say, oh yeah, well that must be Fomalhaut, because it is the brightest star in the region. And we'll talk a little bit about why I look at Capricorn as two triangles now. The reason is because these constellations play a role in many, many myths. And I've talked about the story of doubting Thomas. And Thomas points to this forward leg, which could also be envisioned as a spear wound in the side of Aquarius. Okay, so Thomas puts his hand in the wound in the side of the risen Christ. Okay, a lot of figures in Greek myth that are associated with Aquarius, that are swift runners, that are described as swift runners, let's say in the Iliad, will be killed by a spear to the bowels. They'll be described as being speared in the gut or in the hip, or even in the back, as if this spear has gone all the way through. Okay, so you can match up actually the mortal wounds that characters in the Iliad get, and it helps you figure out which constellation they are, or it confirms that these constellations are playing those characters. So when you see a swift runner, they'll usually meet their end with a spear right here. But other constellations, if it's a charioteer, it'll usually be speared in the face or hit in the face with a sword or something, because that lines up with a different constellation that's a charioteer in the night sky, or it looks like it's driving a chariot. So Aquarius will often have a spear wound to the gut or the bowels or the side. And in the story of doubting Thomas, of course, Thomas places his hand, Jesus invites him to place his hand in his side. And you can see from Renaissance paintings, sacred art, down through the centuries, that Thomas, the hand gestures that he's making actually indicate this goat of Aquarius, even with the little bobtail and the two triangles. So let me put back the traditional outlines with the two triangles of Capricorn, and you'll see that that's why he's always depicted as pointing to the side where Jesus was wounded, because that's associated with the spear wound to the side with the constellation Aquarius. But the hand and arm gestures are very distinctive for the constellation Capricorn. So this story relates to this part of the sky. And doubting Thomas, the Reverend Robert Taylor spoke about how Thomas was a doubting character because the constellation of Capricorn is associated with the sun is traveling through Capricorn at the time of the winter solstice. So It's at the point of maximum southern rising for the sun. It's when the sun has moved to the farthest to the south. The days are the very shortest, and it's the time of doubt. Will the sun ever turn back around and head back up towards the summer? And so Robert Taylor assigns Thomas to Capricorn, and he's right. You can see from artwork, Robert Taylor never mentioned, as far as I know, this relationship between the actual outline of the stars and the artwork, but that's probably because he didn't have the outstanding outlines of H.A. Rey available to him. This system was obviously passed down through the centuries, but now we're able to really see it with tools like Stellarium and going out in the night sky and having access to the outlines of H.A. Rey that we've talked about and how important they are to see that, yes, Aquarius has this forward leg that the goat of Capricorn is pointing towards. That doesn't mean that that Jesus is mostly associated with Aquarius in the stories of the Gospels. In the Gospel accounts, Jesus is actually mostly associated with another constellation, with other constellations, but sometimes with Aquarius. Not as often, but sometimes with Aquarius. In fact, that's when he separates the sheep from the goats. Here's the goats. The sheep has to do with Aries, which we'll talk about another night. But so the sign of Aquarius is extremely mythologically important in many, many myths around the world. And you can find it. This is a very good time of year to go out and look for the constellations Capricorn, Aquarius, and Piscis Austrinus, the southern fish, and find the star Fomalhaut. And I hope that you're able to do that. And I hope that these videos will be helpful to you in finding the constellations for yourself, or even if you're not able to actually go out and see them, if you understand their distinctive features and the distinctive aspects of their outlines that play a role in these myths, then it becomes much easier to understand the celestial language that all the myths are speaking.